ahead and do introductions, or do you think we're all right?
Yeah, I think we're all right. Everybody's got their name up. I see Paige, I'm assuming is Paige Evans from DEQ. Other folks that you can see here are all from WRD. So, you know, Ivan, Deirdre Dooley is admin in the director's office that's hosting the call for us. Ben Scandella is a hydrogeologist out of my group, and so is Mike Toma. So those are the visitors we've got.
All right. So I guess we'll do the minutes.
Okay, so I had sent around the minutes a bit earlier. I'll see if I can pull those up real quick, just so we've got them on the screen. Let's see here. So these were our minutes from February 11th. And how about I go with this? All right. Can everybody see the draft minutes, what we're talking about here?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So I had sent these out a bit earlier, didn't receive any comments back. Though if anybody has anything that they'd like to add or amend, happy to do that now, or we can take a vote to accept.
I will accept the motion.
This is Marshall. I move that we accept the minutes as drafted.
This is John. I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. So it looks like the next thing on the agenda, Ivan, you're up with the Klamath Basin groundwater update.
All right, good morning, everybody. Let's see, I guess I'll touch on a couple of things. And I can't remember the last time we actually talked, but late last year, 2019, or early 2020, I've lost track, we had a circuit court case here in Marion County Circuit called Brooks. So Brooks is an upper basin groundwater user on the upper Sprague River system. He had challenged us on our regulation of wells during the 2019 irrigation season. The circuit court ruling came back that in essence, for us to regulate wells in Oregon, we need to do that through a critical groundwater area declaration and process there. So for 2020, this irrigation season, we have not been regulating any wells. It was our plan along the way to, of course, do some rule updates during the 2020 year, and then COVID got in the way. We're not sure what the exact schedule will be, but I suspect sometime later this calendar year, we'll initiate a rulemaking process for a critical groundwater area there in the Klamath Basin. I think we did talk about that some months ago at the previous meeting there. So again, for this year, there hasn't been any well regulation at all. We did get a lawsuit initiated against us from the Klamath Irrigation District, similar to something that they had proposed back in 2018. They came into Marion Circuit Court again with a mandamus to, in essence, have the water master go down and take control of Link River Dam on Upper Klamath Lake to provide water to the irrigation districts through the Bureau of Reclamation's project works there. We've initiated kind of a fact-finding and a data gathering in response to that. A second suit was filed based on another Oregon statute to, again, basically get a restraining order against the water master in order to get the Water Resources Department to immediately take action. The department continues to gather information in order to take action that we can defend in court if we need to on that. So we're looking at gathering information on diversions from Upper Klamath Lake, additional inflows to the lake, the difference between releasing water through Link River Dam. Is it live flow releases or stored water? It's a very complex system. It's a very large system, and is going to require quite a bit of staff time to manage that down the road there. The project itself, this was not a very good water year. The Bureau had allocated approximately 140,000 acre feet to the project irrigators. That's roughly a third of what they need. They need about 350,000 to really cover things well. After that 140,000 allocation came in, I think April was an unusually dry year, so that was further reduced to approximately 80,000 acre feet, which really was a dire shortage. Because of May and early June being wet, that's been increased back up to the 140,000 acre feet. So it's still going to be a watertight year for them. Ken, I'd be interested in hearing what things are from your perspective down there. But that's about all I've got to report on the Klamath, and happy to take any questions.
Well, I do got a couple of questions, and I'll kind of say some things about that also. I guess my first question is, if you try to do a critical groundwater area, is it going to strictly be the Upper Klamath Basin again, or are you going to try to include the whole basin, the whole county?
I think our intention at this point, Ken, is to include the entire Klamath Basin that's in Oregon. That's all we have authority over. There's really three different management issues down there. The upper basin is control of wells that are impacting surface water supplies. The project area, of course, is a more traditional critical area issue where the groundwater withdrawals over time have created some long-term declines. And then we've got the Lost River Basin, which right now doesn't appear to be any kind of a problem, but the wells up there do have impacts on Bonanza Big Springs, and at some point in time, some controls may need to be put in place to protect that source or other springs in the upper Lost River system there.
Well, I mean, I got definite opinions about that, and I think they're like three different areas: the Upper Klamath Basin, the west side of the project, and then the east side of the project is like three complete different areas. I have problems with grouping them all in one big group and just calling it the whole thing a critical groundwater area. One of the problems with the west side of the project right now is because we are not getting our surface water, there are more wells being used. If we could get the surface water both back allocated, well, my personal opinion is I think it's being stolen, because that suit the KID did against you guys, that basically states that we, the irrigators, are the only ones that have a water right on Klamath Lake. And so, like I said, I personally think it's being stolen. And if we can, there's enough water there, and if we can get back in control of the Link River Dam, there's enough surface water there. And if we get the surface water being used properly, it won't, it definitely takes pressure off the wells, because people won't be using the wells. And so I think that is a huge thing there. If you come out to the Lost River Basin, you and me have talked about this before, Ivan. I disagree with you that those irrigation wells are what's causing the Big Springs problem in Bonanza. I think that was going on long before any of those irrigation wells were drilled. And I'm pretty sure I can come up with proof of that. I think that's one of the things Big Springs has always done, the big springs quit flowing about sometime in July. And one of the things that caused that backflow, the groundwater backflow into the springs, was horsefly had that dam below the springs. One of the things that solved that problem was the simple fact that horsefly put that second dam on the west side of the island, and they no longer, that from sometime in July on, they no longer backwater into the springs, and that's what solved that problem. But that problem was going on long before any of those irrigation wells were drilled. And so I think we're getting the irrigation wells, once again, I think are getting blamed for something that we didn't cause. The critical groundwater in the upper Klamath Basin, I don't know. Once again, I have a problem with calling that a critical groundwater area because of the simple fact that the static levels in the wells are not dropping. The water table is not dropping up there. There are some different issues with some of the artesian wells, but some of them artesian wells were never constructed properly either. And if you go off of what the flows of the Sprague River did in 2018, when you shut off all of those irrigation wells, you shut off 140 irrigation wells, and the flows on the Sprague River, I have them here in front of me, they continued to decline. They never did rebound. So I have questions on how much, I'm not saying there isn't connection there, but how much connection there truly is between the groundwater and the river. And I think one of the reasons the river kept declining was because once you shut the wells off, there's, I believe, about 50% of the irrigation up there is still flood irrigation. And when you shut off all them wells, the river is not getting the gains from the agricultural runoff. And so the river did keep declining. So where's the connection? So yeah, I have some definite questions about calling any of this a critical groundwater area. I really do. And I think it's going to take a lot more discussion to truly go that direction. And one of the reasons we did get that extra 140,000 acre feet of water for the west side of the project was the simple fact that President Trump finally stepped in and told him to give it to us after our tractor rally. So.
Well, Ken, I appreciate your comments. I know you've got a unique perspective out there because you've been around the basin a long time. I can address a few of them there. By designating the Klamath Basin in Oregon a critical groundwater area, it does not mean that we're lumping everything together. The process allows us to break those individual areas into sub-areas as we've done in other critical areas around the state. So we can address the unique characteristics of each sub-area within that rule construct, and we can vary the type and amount of groundwater controls that are put in place with the sub-area designations there. So we can, in essence, customize a critical area. It provides a lot more flexibility than you think. It sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a flexible management technique. And certainly the Marion County Circuit Court thinks that's the appropriate way to go. There will be a lot of process involved in that. You know, there's a rules process that designates a critical groundwater area. But following that rules process, there will likely be a draft order then that comes out from the department that will talk about these are the proposed controls within this sub area of this critical groundwater area. And that sets in motion then a contested case hearing or hearings for the affected people within those critical areas. And that's an opportunity for the public and the water users to bring forth all of their evidence and all of their facts, you know, to weigh in front of an administrative law judge as to why there should be a critical area, why the control should be one way or another, and get things worked out through that process. So it's going to be very involved. There's lots of opportunities for public input there. So everybody will, in essence, get their day in court to bring forth the facts.
Well, I guess in some ways that's good to hear, Ivan. I got to admit, as an irrigator down here and the Water Resource Department wants to classify something a critical groundwater area, it scares it just scares you to death. And so I think any information the Water Resource Department can put out there to help that and get us where we're not quite so scared would be really, really helpful. Because like I said, it just scares us to death when Water Resource Department wants to try to classify anything critical groundwater area. I read through the critical groundwater area, how you classify something a critical groundwater area, the rules on that. And the only thing I could come up with that you can go off of is and I forget what number it was, but it basically stated there had to be a substantial interference between ground and surface water. So then I think the key word you got to define there is substantial. How do you define substantial? What is substantial interference? Because I didn't feel any of the other things fell in. There was like the groundwater dropping down here, anything like that. It's not. You got certain little spots. And like I said, most of them are coming into effect right now because there's a lot of groundwater being used because we're not getting our surface water that we should be getting. So, I mean, just some different things that I see. So.
Yeah, there's a number of reasons why the statutes lay out we would set up a critical area. And one is the hydraulic interference between surface water and groundwater. One is, excessively declining groundwater levels. I think there's a thermal interference if you've got geothermal wells going on, and we don't have that, at least right now anyways. But it's a complicated thing, Ken, but rest assured there'll be plenty of process applied to it, so.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's very interesting. The only other thing I will bring up about that at all, and and the only reason I'm bringing it up because it does kind of affect the surface water right now, which is also affecting the groundwater usage. And that is, once again, I'll bring up that part up there on the Williamson River on the upper Klamath Marsh Wildlife Refuge, where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife bought that Jack Nickel Ranch. And I found some documentation from 2014 that the tribes basically signed off on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife doing what they're doing up there. But what they're doing is, and I got pictures of it, and I'd love to show you guys some of these pictures, and maybe I'll have to do it some other time or some other way, but they got about 1,000 acres underwater up there above Military Crossing. And there's over 300 acres they're flooding out on private property. And this documentation, there's 11 different, they're calling them fish blockage structures, which those are the dams that Jack had in there to back water up in different places to irrigate with. But they're leaving them in all the time. And like I said, they got 1,000 acres underwater up there. So how, I guess it's classified a refuge, they can do what they want. But I guess one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is the tribes in this documentation I found from 14, the tribes signed off on this. But when the tribes call on their water, they don't call on any of that water. They only call on irrigation water. So how is that right?
Yeah, and I don't understand, as we've talked before, Ken, I don't understand the workings of the refuge up there, but our water master has been looking into that, so.
Yeah, and I've actually talked to her a little bit about it also. So, no, there are a lot of different things going on down here. I still believe there's way too much water being released through the Link River down the Klamath River, which in history did not happen before the railroad and before the project did not happen. So, and the only reason it's happening right now is because of the project being here, and they can because of the project. And I don't agree with that. So,
Well, that's surface water, and we're the groundwater advisory committee. So
yeah, well, and
we'll
like
leave
I
that
said,
for another group.
and it is, but it's connected because of the simple fact that we're not getting the surface water, and so we're using a lot of groundwater. That's why it is.
It is connected for sure.
Yeah. So,
Hey,
Okay.
Ivan, it's John.
enough of my ranting and raving.
John, I have a question. You had mentioned if you list it as a critical groundwater area, you can break it up into sub areas. And I think you said, as in other places in the state. What, can you give me an example of a critical groundwater area now that's broken up into sub areas?
Stage Gulch is a critical area out in the Umatilla Basin out there, basalt aquifer system. And there's several critical sub areas within the Stage Gulch one as an example.
So they have different rulings in the sub areas then?
They did it mostly, and Justin's probably more familiar with that. They did it kind of on an allocation back in the day when they established the critical area based on some limited groundwater level information, some understanding of the stratigraphy there with some faulting. They felt that the basalt system in that Stage Gulch critical area was broken up into several different compartments, if you will. And so the wells in any given compartment were put into a sub area. And then based on the water level trends and the groundwater use data from that sub area, they came up with an allocation for the particular sub area to slow the water level declines. And those allocations varied depending on the sub area. So some of them had a relatively small percentage of curtailment. I think the worst sub area I recall was around 90% of the groundwater use was curtailed off in a particular sub area there.
I want to make sure we get Mark as well. He's had his hand up for a question or comment.
Yeah, just maybe a couple clarifying questions, Ivan. One, if you could go through the process a little bit more on how a critical groundwater designation would occur. I know it's been decades since one has happened. That might be beneficial for this group. Two, will there be any adjudication process of surface water, groundwater to go with that critical groundwater designation? And three, you mentioned that there might be more flexible options under critical groundwater designation. Could you give us some examples?
So again, the process as we envision it would be initiating a rule process to set up the boundaries of a critical area, provide some of the factual information as to why a critical area is necessary, and probably add in that process things like a serious water management problem area where the groundwater users within the pending critical area would be required to have flow meters and report groundwater use to gather additional data on the system there. Once that rule process is done, the department would be issuing a preliminary order or draft order for a particular sub area, if you will, within that critical area. And that draft order would lay out the proposal for controlling the groundwater use and all of the facts and supporting information behind it. At that point, it looks like there will be a contested case hearing process initiated where those affected groundwater users would have an opportunity to get in front of an administrative law judge and lay out their case, if you will, any facts or information that they have that would shed light on why the controls are a good thing, why they're not a good thing, what the department understands or what the department doesn't understand. And the administrative law judge would go through all of that information and then come up with a ruling. If the ruling's in favor, the ALJ would either affirm the order or would issue an affirming process there, and that order would become final. I believe it would still be challengeable in a court of appeals if folks wanted to carry the fight further down the path. The critical groundwater areas that have been set up in the state so far were all done under the pre-existing process, and not under this particular process that we've got in place. The statutes were changed in the period of time between like the early and mid 1990s. And since then, no critical areas have been established. And Mark, what other question did you have then?
The two other questions were, one, would there be any adjudication process for surface water or groundwater within this process? And secondly, you said a critical groundwater designation could afford more flexibility for the basin. Could you give me some examples of that?
Sure. So we don't envision any adjudication process being part of the critical area process at this time. The flexibility from a critical area, the way we interpret the statutes, it gives our commission very broad authority and the director to come up with the way groundwater will be managed within critical areas. And by that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to follow the prior appropriation doctrine, whereby the junior users are shut off. The commission could designate municipal uses as a higher and more beneficial use. Stock water, as an example, could be protected. They also could do, instead of a strict priority regulation where the junior rights are off, 100% off back to a certain priority date, they could more equitably spread that burden, if you will, and curtail all the groundwater uses within a particular area a certain percentage in order to reduce the overall groundwater pumping to obtain reasonably stable groundwater levels that we're after there.
So Ivan, I got another question for you. So what are the chances that if you did something like this critical groundwater area, that we could set up some kind of a local committee to help with the regulation and help with the ideas and going along with what you're talking about?
Well, Ken, I think that's a good approach. I mean, what we're looking at in the Harney Basin, as an example, are voluntary agreements. And that's an opportunity for the groundwater users to work together to come up with some sort of self-control, if you will, in order to get to the groundwater savings that we need to obtain whatever the desired outcome is. You know, either less interference with surface water or obtaining the reasonably stable groundwater levels. That's an approach I think that we hope to see bear some fruit out in Harney there. The whole rule process is likely going to take, I suspect, probably every bit of a year. And there's going to be ample time during those conversations for folks to bring ideas to the table. It's been our experience that if we're not pushing on a solution, folks don't move in the direction that they need to be moving. And so, as we've stated in the Harney Basin as well, you know, we'll be starting a critical area process there that's going to parallel the voluntary agreement process to basically keep that bus moving in a forward direction. If the groundwater users in the Klamath Basin in one of these particular sub areas come up with a good plan that meets the intent of what we need to do, it would go before the commission basically as a proposal, and the commission can adopt that as a voluntary agreement, and that's how the groundwater would end up being controlled at that point.
So is this committee, would it be something that we just put together down here, or would it be in conjunction with the Water Resource Department?
I think you can certainly put something together down there. There's nothing stopping that. What would really be missing from that conversation, I think, is making sure folks understand and buy into the basin hydrology. And we really struggled with that in the Klamath. There's people that still to this day challenge us on the hydraulic connection findings. You bring up the degree of interference between wells. So I think some sort of a coordinated approach would be better, where, we're there to provide some information and data and some sense of where do you need to get in order to protect either the senior surface water rights in the upper basin, or what kind of groundwater use in the project area appears to be sustainable and not create further groundwater level declines. You know, we want to make sure folks really understand that. So as they work, and it's going to be hard work to come up with a local solution or a voluntary agreement, they're doing it with all the facts on the table and an understanding of some of the hard choices that are going to need to be made.
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Ken.
well, the only other thing I was going to say with that is I just think that's a really good approach for the Water Resource Department to take because of the fact that local group. I think it would be way easier to convince everybody down here that it needs to be a critical groundwater area if they had a local committee that had some say and some pull with what the Water Resource Department did. So I think that's a really good approach to take. So.
And, you know, and Ken, just to clarify for everybody, you know, our rules process will, you know, develop a rules advisory committee, and there will be a broad group of stakeholders, you know, many of which will be groundwater users, let's say in the project area or the upper basin or the Lost River Basin, as well as all the other folks that have, you know, a stake in the basin as well. So.
Hey, Ivan, this is Phil. I had a question for you, and,
Okay.
apologies if you covered this and I somehow missed it. Is the critical groundwater area that you're evaluating now? Is it something you guys were working on prior to the court ruling, or is this in response to?
We had been contemplating the critical area down there, Phil, for a number of years. You know, primarily in the project areas where our eyes were originally with the groundwater pumping and the groundwater level declines that were going on. As we started to do regulation under the first and second generation of those Division 25 rules in the upper basin, you know, it became more evident that some greater flexibility would be helpful. And, you know, when we were regulating under the Division 25 rules, it's pretty prescriptive. You know, junior rights are off 100%. There's no way to kind of proportionately allocate some water to the users there while still being protective of the senior surface water rights. And so, you know, that got us having internal discussions about critical area as an opportunity there to get that better flexibility.
Okay, thanks.
Marshall, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've got just a couple of quick questions, and the answers can be brief. First one's just for Ken. What do you referred to the western part of the project? Are you talking sort of west of Olean Gap, or what's your, when you mentioned west of the project, the western part of the project, what are you talking about?
Well, Marshall, the line is where Harpole Dam is actually.
Okay.
That, and it's where the east side, there's a west side and an east side to this project. The west side is from Harpole Dam west, and most of like Po Valley and any water left in the river goes actually clear down to TID. So there's a little water from this east side goes to the west side, but very little. And most of the water for the west side of the project comes from Cloud Lake.
Okay, I that's kind of what I was thinking, but I just wanted to make sure. So my other question really is just one for Justin, and you know, it seemed like after the Klamath, you know, QAPA went away and the WUMP program sort of evaporated. Looking at data, it seemed like water levels were recovering in a lot of the Oregon side of, say, that Tule Lake sub-basin. It seemed like the only, and admittedly it's been a couple of years since I've really looked at those data. It seemed like it was way down the south around the Panhandle and TID 14 where things were, seemed to be kind of, hang on a second, ramping down still. And got a daughter that decided to play the piano here. So I just wondered if those, if things have recovered, if they're sort of at an equilibrium, or if they're starting to decline again.
Sure. So certainly, I'm not going to be able to say exactly where within the project, but let's say centered around Malin and Merrill. During periods of drought when surface water is limited and we've issued drought permits, we've seen pretty significant declines seasonally. And those have resulted in persistent aquifer-wide declines over time. And so in interim years, if we have a couple wet years, we might see 1 or 2 feet of recovery, but that's to a background of 15 per season during these drought years, as an example, roughly. So we have persistent declines around that Merrill Malin area, greater than 20 feet. In some areas, it's 30
Okay.
plus. So while there is some recovery, it's not to the same magnitude as the drawdowns.
Good enough.
In these big.
Is the level of monitoring, there was a lot of monitoring going on down there that was funded by reclamation, and also CDWR was pretty active. And is that it seemed like that was kind of throttling back. Is the monitoring up to what you guys think it needs to be?
Going into the future, probably not. So you're right. The Bureau of Rec has drawn down their funding, and I believe that this year it's actually 0. They were in a cost share with the USGS, as well as a separate program with OWRD, focused more on the drought permits than the monitoring. I believe that the GS was able to pull together funding to continue monitoring water levels this year, but next year, as far as I know, that is unfunded and won't occur. And that's both on the Oregon and California side of the project.
That's unfortunate. Last question, I guess, is just a quick one for Ivan, and that has to do with the whole idea of requiring a critical groundwater area to manage groundwater down there. What does that do to some of the ongoing rulemaking, like the rules that, as I understand it, are still sort of being developed, that we, this committee sort of approved a year or 2 ago, dealing with regulating groundwater, say in the upper part of the basin. Does that sort of, in my mind, kind of renders those sort of irrelevant? Is that correct?
At this point in time, Marshall, what rendered those rules irrelevant was the Marion County Circuit Court finding from the judge here. Yeah, and so that's effectively why we chose not to appeal it. Again, we thought the critical area was probably a more appropriate way to go in the long run anyways. And so the critical area process and those rules, which will come before GWAC, will basically supersede the Division 25 rules. They're still valid and on the books. There is a sunset clause in them that I think spring of 2021, they'll basically not be enforceable anymore. But the critical area process will end up superseding all of that.
Okay, thank you. I'll let us get back to our agenda.
Are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the next deal, the legislative and budget update.
Okay, so Raquel Rancier has joined us, as well as some of her staff. I'm not sure exactly who's going to give the presentation. Assuming that's going to be Raquel. And while we have a little bit of a break here, can I ask, we've been joined by a person on the phone ending in 3463. Could you just let us know who's joined?
This is Susan Baker. It may be me. The county scrambles my actual phone number.
Gotcha.
So
all right.
You can't.
Yep.
So I think that might be me.
I think that's you too. Thanks. Glad you could join us, Susan.
Glad to be here.
Yep. And just so you know, I'm going to hit the mute, but if you want to jump on *6 to unmute, and I think it was *9 to put the raise your hand symbol up. So
Okay.
with that, I'll move over to Raquel. Hey, Raquel, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, or at least I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Okay. Sorry, this is the first time that I'm calling in and also on the computer, so I haven't gotten this down yet. So for the record, Raquel Ryan, Senior Policy Manager with the Oregon Water Resources Department. And today we're going to be talking about the 2021 legislative concepts and budget packages. I'll note here that yes, there is actually going to be a special session this week, and we're not intending to talk much about that. There's not much on the special session at this point in time for water issues. So the 2021 legislative session, agencies do start preparing legislative concepts and budget packages. And I think we may have talked about this earlier this year and with this group. And essentially we have on today's agenda, I'm going to actually start with attachment 2. So if you looked at the Water Resources Commission staff reports, you'll see the details there. I believe Justin included a link to those materials. They're also on our website. I figured I would at least start with the budget packages, and that would be a shorter conversation. And really, I think the big piece that you all will be interested in is the legislative concept. I do want to recognize, though, that in terms of the budget packages, we do know that there's likely going to be budget shortfalls, so for the 2021 biennium. However, at this point in time, we started budget package development pre-COVID and prior to really the economic challenges that Oregonians in the state are facing. And so we still have these packages here, in part also because we've been directed by, or at least the Secretary of State's audit in 2016 said that we really should be communicating our gaps and shortfalls and really the agency needs to the legislature. So we do know that there is a lot of questions around the viability of packages moving forward. However, we do think these are all important packages, and you'll see we have a fairly long list actually, because we do think that the work that is being done across the state and locally is really important. And so we want to at least keep those conversations moving forward. So, or at least make the legislature and the governor's office aware of those potential opportunities. So with that, if you look at attachment 2 of the commission staff reports, which has the list of the packages, the ones that I really just wanted to note for you, if you look at the staff report, you can kind of see our prioritization and principles there for that prioritization. But really what I did want to note for this group is there's package number 7 on there, which is protecting groundwater supplies. And that one includes 3 positions to review well log reports and follow up on deficiencies and inspections. And then 100,000, which is a small amount, we know, but would be an amount to at least get a program started to fund the permanent abandonment, repair, or replacement of wells to address construction deficiencies that can lead to groundwater level declines or serve as a conduit for contamination, as well as repair or replacement of wells for water for human consumption for low-income households or in areas of declining groundwater levels where other sources of water are not feasible. So that one's really one that's focused on well construction and well construction deficiencies. The 100,000 for the funding program is tied to our legislative concept more directly than the other ones. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well on the legislative concepts. And moving into the next package that I would just highlight for all of you, 10 is the groundwater basin studies package. This one includes resources to do evapotranspiration study, as well as groundwater basin or a basin recharge study for the whole state, and then also to prepare other basins for study. And really, Justin's the expert on that package if there's further questions around those. And then finally, the other one that I would note is the Harney one, number 13. This one is the Harney CREP Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and establishing one within the Harney Basin to conserve groundwater. So those are the ones that have really direct ties to groundwater issues. Of course, really many of these packages have groundwater ties, but in the interest of time, I'll just see if there's any questions on those at the end of our presentation here. And I won't get into the details of each one of those. So I'll turn your attention then to the legislative concepts, which is attachment 1. The Water Resources Department has 5 legislative concepts. I'm only going to talk about 2 of those today, but again, feel free to ask questions about any of them. The first one I'll draw your attention to in brief is the water right transactions fee schedule. And this one is a fee schedule that we bring forth to the legislature essentially every 4 years. And it is to essentially increase fees to address the increased costs of doing business. And generally in recent years, we have done that by taking the cost amount increases that the Department of Administrative Services provides for the 4-year period and increasing the fees by that amount. So that one is one that we talk about every 4 years. As a result of that, we are anticipating shortfalls within that section. So that one, I think, will be some, there'll be additional conversations around that. I bring that one up because, of course, groundwater rates are part of that fee schedule in terms of applications and transfers and other transactions and services provided by the department. So the next one that I'll draw your attention to is the well construction one. It's on page 3 of attachment 1. And really, this one has been one that we've long been in the process, I think, of talking about. Back in 2018, we had begun some conversations about the need to modernize our well construction program. Internally, we talked about it. We had some conversations with the Oregon Groundwater Association. There are, in the 2016 Secretary of State's audit, there is some recommendations in there about improving the well construction program. And the 2017 Integrated Water Resources Strategy, there is also some recommended actions related to improving the well construction program. So really, this is something that we've been thinking about for a while, and didn't have the resources necessarily to begin to address it during the 2019 session, since we were focused on dam safety at that point in time. I'll note that this legislative concept, the department, our approach really is to have a lot of engagement with stakeholders. And so we will be holding a work group meeting with stakeholders in July, and we're in the process of scheduling that. If anyone is interested in participating in that, just shoot me an email, and I will include you in the information and materials and scheduling of those work group meetings to discuss these. So this really is, I think, the first, the beginning point for discussions, and I anticipate that this concept will change over time and be refined over time. I tend to find that we can often improve legislation and make it more practical for everyone involved when we have more engagement and input, because people see different things in it and think of things differently. So, which helps us make a better concept. In terms of what the goals are for this is really, you all may be familiar with the well construction program, but we're only able to inspect today about 30% of the wells that are newly constructed wells in the state. And we've historically never had resources to inspect all wells in the state. So from that standpoint, we know that there's wells out there that have not been inspected and that continue to have well construction deficiencies. And so Justin, yeah, you can just stay on this page. Thank you for pulling that up. So, you know, in terms of the goals for this legislative concept is we really do want to, we know that there's going to be challenges in the coming biennium with resources. We want to be able to maximize our limited resources. And part of that is improving our ability to plan our inspection workloads. Currently, we don't have much ability to do that for various reasons. In part, you know, we don't receive start cards necessarily in a manner that allows us to plan workloads. We don't have them expire. So there's a number of start cards that are still out there. We don't have information on when a seal may be placed for us to be able to do an inspection at that point in time. It's most valuable. So there's a lot of different things that we could do to help us improve that. And then in addition, we want to be able to increase our efficiency in processing start cards and well logs. We currently have about 85% that are submitted electronically, and there's about 15% that are not. And so we'd like to see those be submitted electronically in the future, as well as receiving GPS locations for new wells and well construction, which we've found to be very helpful, particularly when we're doing groundwater studies or trying to inspect those wells and being able to accurately locate them. We also want to make sure that well drillers have the proper training and understanding of best practices to proactively prevent well construction deficiencies. And I'll talk about some of the current programs that we have and then additional provisions that we'd like to see. And then we also want to, and we've heard quite a bit about this in recent years, there was legislation in 2019 brought by the Oregon Groundwater Association, where the well drillers have concerns about unlimited liability from the standpoint of they're essentially liable for as long as they're licensed for any well construction deficiencies. And so we have a proposal that we're considering that will balance the need. Our concerns have been that there is a need for us to balance and protect well owners and the resource with balancing that with driller concerns about liability. And then also, finally, there is, our goal is to also establish a funding source to help address legacy well construction issues. And this relates to that $100,000 that I mentioned in the budget package. We're doing so will protect groundwater resources for those that rely on that. So I'll give you a little bit more detail. You can see, really you can read the bullets in more depth here, but in order to achieve those goals, some of the provisions that we are considering include requiring new applicants for a well driller's license to provide evidence of welding ability. That one would allow us to make sure that they're able to properly weld the casings. In addition, requiring a constructor to place a seal on at least 2 wells per biennium in the presence of a well or a well inspector or a representative from the Water Resources Department in order to renew a license. In addition, in terms of well driller experience, our continuing education program is set to sunset in 2022. And so this would extend the sunset on the continuing education program to 2030. It would allow the department to charge less than currently in the statute, which is $40 for continuing education credit for department sponsored courses, which would give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of offering courses where we've identified a real benefit to well drillers and being able to ensure that they're properly constructing wells. And then also, this was based on some feedback that we received from some stakeholders in regards to the membership of the Continuing Education Committee, which read it and essentially to include a member who has expertise in groundwater quality, public health, or employee safety. And that was out of an observation that currently the committee has 3 members from the drilling community and 1 member from the regulatory community. So this proposal would make it 2 from the well drilling community, 1 from the regulatory community, and then 1 who has expertise in groundwater quality, public health, or employee safety, which could be from the regulatory community or could be someone that represents one of those public interests. In addition, the proposal includes a requirement that start cards must be submitted at least 72 hours before beginning work on a well and no earlier than 60 days before beginning work. So one of the current challenges, and this goes around being able to plan our inspection workload, is that start cards can be submitted a year before, and there's no time limits, right? And so we don't actually know when the work is going to begin based on when the start cards are submitted. They can also be submitted day of, and so obviously that doesn't help us be able to plan our workloads. Within that start cards, the driller would need to provide the approximate timeframes for beginning construction and seal placement and then completion of construction. And if for some reason, because we do want to be flexible, if the seal placement ends up being different than that time frame, they would need to provide at least 4 hours prior to seal placement notice to the department if it's different than what is on the start card. And then start cards, if work does not begin, they would expire within 60 days. And so this is really to try to help us, again, be able to plan our workloads and understand what wells are being drilled within the state. In addition, we have in here, as I noted, in terms of efficiency and processing start cards and well logs, we would, starting July of 2021 or 2024, require electronic submission of all start cards and well logs, as well as the inclusion of GPS coordinates on all well logs. And so this is really geared at trying to maximize our staff resources, and currently doing manual entry of start cards and well logs can take up a lot of staff time to do that. And really, we'd like to move towards what we see as more accurate in terms of having those submitted electronically. We do want to give people, though, some time to adjust, and so that's why it's set to 2024. And then the GPS coordinates are just vital. We find a lot of errors with locations, and this will help our staff as well when they're doing groundwater studies, for example, be able to really find those wells as well as the well inspectors. And then finally, well, there's 2 more provisions. We also have in here a proposal to address the liability, but really recognizing that the agency has limited resources. And so within this, we've established essentially a tiered liability system where, for example, if there is a higher review by the agency, the liability would be shorter for the driller. And then essentially, if we had not inspected the well or reviewed the well log or received video of the well, that the liability would be longer, but there would be a cap on it of 15 years. So that is kind of the spectrum there. So if we had done a well inspection during seal placement and reviewed the well log, that would be on the shorter end of the scale of 3 years. And then there's interim steps in between there in terms of maybe not as stringent of a review, but that would lead to shorter liability periods. And then if the agency had not had the opportunity to do anything on it, it would be 15 years, which is shorter than today's current standard, again, which is unlimited liability for the period of the license. So that's how we tried to balance, one, protecting landowners, balancing the limited agency resources but also recognizing the concerns of the drilling community of being liable for well deficiencies. And then finally, the last one is the one that I've mentioned a couple times here, which is establishing water well abandonment repair and replacement revolving fund. And this really, we started having conversations about this several years ago, in part because of you all may be familiar with the Mosier program, where we had received funding from the legislature to repair and replace wells out there to address well construction deficiencies, which really had impacts on the groundwater resource and people that were relying on that resource. And we've heard similar kind of concerns around the state regarding domestic well users and those that need it for human consumption and that may have a need to repair or replace their wells. So there's other provisions in here, such as being able to repair or replace a well for human consumption for low-income households, and then in areas of declining groundwater levels where other sources of water are not feasible. So there's a lot in there, and like I said, this is the beginning. I'm sure there's going to be changes to it, and we're looking forward to having conversations about how to make this legislative concept work and make sure that we're being responsible to the public and to our charge to protect the resource, and as well as to the drilling community to make sure that they're able to do their work as well and provide water to those that need it. So I'm going to stop there. That was a lot, and see if there are any questions.
I think I saw Trent had his hand up at one point.
Yeah, I
Still have a
did
question.
have a question, and that was just the length of time for the liability for the well driller on the well. But you answered that, and you were saying that you're looking at a 15-year, basically a liability term for the well driller after the well has been installed and the seal has been placed.
Chair Maston and member, yes, that is correct. And when I say 15-year liability, that's the maximum. That's if the agency does not have the opportunity to inspect the well or to review the well log. It would be shorter. So 3 years, for example, if the department was able to observe seal placement and reviewed the well log, and we determined that it appeared that the work had been properly completed. So it's kind of a sliding scale based on to what extent we've been able to review the information. And that's in part, we know that there's an interest from at least some members of the drilling community of having a shorter period of liability in the 3-year range. At the same time, we also know that we have not, we've never had resources to inspect all wells in the state. And so this has been really the only way to address well construction deficiencies is if we find it 20 years later, is to have the driller, if they're still licensed, fix the issue. And so I think what we're really trying to do is recognize, you know, their concerns around having liability for 20 years. And at the same time, recognize that we have these well deficiencies potentially out there, and that particularly in the current economy, that it's going to be a challenge to get resources. And so we're trying to bring a middle ground. And so that's why we've had this sliding scale. If the agency's been able to review it, it would be shorter period of time and longer period of time if there's been no review.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a pretty decent compromise too. So, thanks. That's outstanding.
Thank you.
So are there any other questions?
I'd just make a comment, Ken, to Raquel. Speaking on behalf of the Oregon Groundwater Association, we're really looking forward to the conversations of improving the well construction rules. And from my perspective, also the Groundwater Association, but probably more than anything of getting a review of all the well logs. And that in itself, I think, will improve the well construction tremendously. So I'm excited about that one.
My only comment would be, I believe 10 actually probably started in this committee, Justin, and worked forward. So it's been something that I've been trying to get traction on for multiple years. So I'm glad it ended up in a policy option package. And secondly, I'd be willing to answer any questions on also.
I just want to second Mark's comment regarding 10. When I saw that, I thought that was pretty neat, and I had the same thought of the committee sort of came to fruition. So thank you for that, Justin.
Yes, well, I thank you for all of your comments. Certainly, the budget packages, both the one that focuses on well construction and the well log review, we would love to see. We rank that one, pretty highly, in part because we know this is an outstanding issue that needs to be addressed. We also have included really the groundwater package number 10 because it's an important issue, and as well as the Harney package because it really is an important issue locally. So it was really hard to try to narrow down our budget packages. So we still have quite a bit there because really this work is important. So I do appreciate the work that this committee has done to provide input to help us be able to identify where we should try to focus resources. I want to thank the Oregon Groundwater Association for the well log review input and really heightening the profile of that issue. And then of course, Mark, for heightening the profile of the basin studies and recharge. So as well as this committee. So yes, there's a lot more work to be done. I wish we were coming in with a better economy and budget environment. So we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the Harney Basin groundwater update.
Okay, thanks, Raquel. Let's see here. I'm going to give a preview here of the PowerPoint that I'm intending to provide to the commission, just to make sure that it goes smoothly with you folks, and to make sure that what I show is what I intend to show. So I'm assuming now everybody can see just the slide. Yeah. All right, good. Okay, so this is a real brief update to the commission at their meeting tomorrow, and the goal is to start to provide some background ahead of anticipated rulemaking for the Harney Basin in 2021. So a couple of items is that, for a number of years, as I've reported to this group and the commission and others before, we've been working on the data analysis since about late 2018, and we've had preliminary results coming in that are being put into the draft report that's currently in the peer review process. That being said, some of the preliminary findings have shown that the rate and magnitude of groundwater level declines in some area of the basins is worse than we expected, and we believe that reduction in groundwater use is going to be needed to achieve reasonably stable water levels. So what that means is discussion of critical groundwater area and or voluntary agreements, and as Ivan mentioned earlier, likely a parallel parallel path starting in 2021. So real quick, and I think that folks are well aware by this point, I've shown this slide enough times of where we're talking about. So we've got outline in red here of the hydrologic Harney Basin surface water boundaries. We've got an outline in blue here of the greater Harney Valley, which is basically the lowlands where most of the groundwater development is occurring. Dots are our monitoring network and the various frequencies at which we monitor. For geographic reference, we got Burns here and Highway 20 coming through. So this is the area that we're talking about in general. Again, just want to make sure that we always touch on the background that in 2015, our initial assessments indicated that we were pumping more water than was being recharged to the groundwater system, and therefore we were taking stored water, and that caused declining water levels. We changed the basin program rules, or the commission did, in 2016, which among other things initiated the groundwater study. And again, that study is currently undergoing the peer review process and publication. We're still planning on near the end of 2020. So in the future, after the report is published, the current rules give us a 1-year period to initiate a rules advisory committee. We're going to initiate that relatively quickly after the report is published. And again, kind of in addition to the rules saying we would do it anyway, the rules actually say that we'll explore whether changes are needed. I think, again, with the preliminary results, it's pretty good evidence that certainly in some parts of the basin, we're going to need additional controls. And so, again, we've mentioned that at several venues in the basin, and want to make sure that the commission is clear on that's our intention going forward. That being said, in this particular meeting, I just wanted to touch on 3 things that we've been doing kind of in the background. We've talked a lot about the basin study. We've talked a lot about the place-based planning with the commission and therefore with this group. We haven't talked a lot about just our general core functions and what we've been doing in the basin with respect to communication, with respect to the water rights processing, and with respect to allocation and enforcement. So again, the staff report gave a lot more details on what we've done in each of these areas. I just want to touch on, throwing up there as a reminder, the sub-bullets on this slide are all, again, detailed in the commission report. But one of our goals is we want to try and provide as much information as possible about expected future changes to groundwater management in the basin, so that groundwater users out there can make the most informed decisions that are possible, understanding that there's still a good deal of uncertainty between here and rule changes, a lot of public input and thinking to be done. Also want to make sure that folks are aware that water right transactions continue. So even though the change in the basin rules put a lot of limits on new groundwater permits, we've had about 6, I think, approved since the new rules were in place in 2016. And a lot more activity on extensions of time. That's existing permits that have a completion date that folks would like to extend out. Claims of beneficial use for people that have been fully built out their permitted water use system. And then a lot of transfers in the basin. A lot of folks moving water rights around, and that's to be expected when the ability to apply for new permits is limited. So we've been doing a couple of things. First of all, we have prioritized all the claims of beneficial use in the Harney Basin to try and get those all processed. So we've had a claim of beneficial use backlog for a number of years, and we've focused our energy on the Harney for the past year or so to try and get all those claims that have been sitting, waiting review pushed through the review process and certificates issued. with respect to the extensions of time, we have been processing those according to our best available information. And as this study has provided more information that, again, in some parts of the basin, we're over allocated on the groundwater section, we've been choosing not to provide extensions of time, or I should say choosing to. In our assessment process, the assessment criteria have come out for a negative finding on extensions of time. So that's been one of the main topics of this communication about our press releases and direct letters to permit holders to make sure that they're aware that extensions of time to develop more land are probably unlikely, and that, you know, if they're contemplating building out between now and their completion date, that may or may not be a real sound investment. So again, our goal is to have the most accurate picture of water rights. We want to have all these extensions, claims, transfers processed so that we know what the world of water rights is out there. And secondly, to make sure that we're communicating that as best as we can with folks in the basin. And then lastly, we've been working, the field services group has been working on distribution and enforcement of groundwater rights. So over the past couple of years, we've regulated off some unauthorized groundwater uses, folks that were irrigating without a proper water right. We've been enforcing on some permit conditions, minimum well construction standards, and lastly, investigating well interference complaints. So our general goal with that is, that focus is to make sure that the existing groundwater use in the basin is all legally entitled by a valid water right, so that, again, when we look forward to rulemaking that might change how we manage water in the basin, that we know that the baseline is as solid as possible and we know what's going on. So again, trying to make the commission aware, make you folks on GWAC aware that preliminary findings are worse than expected in some areas, that we believe a reduction in groundwater use is needed in those areas. We're planning to give a more detailed summary of the study results later this year as the report nears publication or is published. And we expect to be discussing basin program rules with this group and the commission in 2021. So that's what I've got, and I'm happy to answer folks' questions on that, what we've been up to, what the future may hold.
So Justin, on one of your slides, it said we had an outreach meeting in October 2019 and one in March of 2020 with question and answer. The March one was scheduled. I don't believe it ever occurred because of COVID-19. We might want to take it off, and it's rescheduled for, I believe, September, October of this year.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Didn't the meeting that we had in the basement of the courthouse is the one that I was alluding to? I believe that was early March, or
maybe February, I believe. I could be wrong. If that's the one you're alluding to, we need to look at it could have been in March, but let's look at the date on that one again.
Okay,
I thought it was more of the public out. So that to me was a continuation of the last groundwater study advisory committee meeting. It wasn't actually a public outreach meeting. We did have some collaborative members join that, but we had a full-blown public outreach meeting scheduled for March, I believe, that was canceled. So maybe I'm confusing the two, Justin.
Yeah, and maybe I need to be more descriptive. So thank you.
So my last comment, I'll just say it at this meeting. Probably everybody in this committee knows how fully vested I've been in this process for multiple years. I've become a legislator now, so I will be busy probably for the first 165 days of next year. I have a real desire to be in that RAC, involved in those meetings. And I know in the 512 basin rules, it allows us 1 year after the groundwater study is published in order to convene that RAC. I would hope there'd be some consideration to letting the legislative session end before that RAC starts. And I know it's not all about me, but I think I could be instrumental there, Justin. So
Yep, nope, that's, I've taken a note, and that's certainly worth discussing. So we'll do that.
I'll just give
Alright.
one more overview. Some of the preliminary findings that we're finding, if we look at the water balance or water budget, currently there's about 230 to 240,000 acre feet in draft that comes into the basin and recharge. I believe that number. I haven't looked at it for a while, but the current groundwater consumptive use is about 230, 240,000 acre feet. So it's not good in that basin. So we talk about water budgets a lot of times as a checkbook. So water coming in, water going out. We're definitely depleting our checkbook now from our savings. We found that some of that savings is 3,000 to 10,000 years old. But the thing that I will encourage as we move forward is, yes, we are in a negative trend, but let's not panic. We need time to work ourselves out of this. I feel that I'm going to try to lead volunteer agreements. So even in the worst areas in the basin, maybe we've used 15 to 20% of that checkbook that's there. As we continue to draw down that checkbook, there does come some domestic and ecological concerns, but we're going to need time to continue to draw that down to where we can hit a reasonable, stable groundwater level. And in my simple mind, even if we have to get to 40 to 50% of that checkbook before we can hit reasonably stable, that allows my community to work through those issues socially, economically, and ecologically. If we panic and try to shut that off and hit reasonably stable at the current rate of that checkbook, it will not be beneficial for my community at all. So it's something we're going to wrestle with. Where I am thinking the agriculture community gets together, comes up with a plan, something potentially like a 3% reduction a year for 10 years. And what is the desired outcome? So maybe the desired outcome with that 30% reduction is to slow that rate of decline in half. If we don't hit that goal, we possibly have to reduce more. If we hit that goal, we come back together and see are we at reasonably stable or not, and maybe we have to repeat. So maybe this process in some of those areas take 10, 20, 30 years. But in that process, we can also identify potentially what the groundwater level would be in 10, 20, and 30 years. So we're not shooting in the dark. If current static water levels there in March are 100 foot right now, and we're declining 5 foot a year, and we want to reduce that in half in 10 years, we can do the math. We can do the math that says in 30 years, we could be at a groundwater pumping level of 350 foot. So we can plan for domestic use. We can plan for other uses, knowing how deep we have to drill those wells now. But it allows the agricultural community to plan and work through, which is very important, not just to the ag community in my community, but it's important to the tax base. It's important to the community. It's important to the schools. We have to have time as a community to work through this.
Hey, Mark, I got a question for you. Have you considered, and you say the reduction, a 3% reduction, is it, how are you trying to get that reduction? And have you considered buyouts in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, so we have Ken. First of all, let's start with what the reduction will come from. So I thought, and I think Justin will agree with this, is the reduction is not going to start from the certificated use. It's not going to start from the paper use. It's going to start from our assumption of what is the actual usage on the ground. That's going to be done with evapotranspiration modeling to show what is the average use in those sub areas of a critical groundwater designation. It's going to come in, I believe, someplace at 2.35 to 2.4 acre feet. So we're going to have to reduce down from that. Ken, we're talking about multiple tools, efficiencies for conservation, or conservation through efficiencies, converting it over to LISA, converting it over to DRIP. We're also, as in policy option package 13, looking at a CREP program. So right now, it looks like we're going to get support from FSA to do a CREP program. If we can find state funding, the state funding has to be a 25% match for that CREP. We look at buying out or sitting idle that ground. with a large, possibly monetary figure for a voluntary cancellation of that water rate in 15 years. So we are looking at trying to figure out some monetary compensation for those certificates, because I feel they do have a monetary value and they are a private property and equity right. So therefore we got to figure out how to compensate for that as we start to need to dry those up. But that's just my opinion.
Well, that's very interesting, Mark. And the reason I asked that question is you guys seem to be very far, quite a ways along in this whole process. And I think some of that could possibly be, some of that, same things could be used down here in this Klamath Basin also.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, Ken. One way we're ahead of you, the other way we're behind you. I spent a lot of time talking about water, and when we start those conversations, I'd always say, I'm thankful we're not Klamath Basin. But it now seems like you're going to be prioritizing a critical groundwater designation before we are, so those opportunities for some of those might flip now, and so we might have to work together to figure out how we can support you and some of our thinking on those volunteer agreements and try to get your ag community together, Ken.
Well, thank you. I agree with that, and I agree with trying to work together and trying to help each other out in all aspects.
Perfect.
Are there any other questions? If not, I guess we go to the, is there any public comment? If not, I guess that looks like it's it. Is that right, Justin? You got anything else?
Nothing else for me, thanks.
Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up at this time?
Not here.
If not, I guess we're done. So, oh, I had one question, Justin. I guess we didn't have to have any kind of a motion or anything on that, what you was bringing up before the commission tomorrow?
No. So what I am bringing up in front of the commission, that's just an informational item. So it's just to let them know what we've been up to. So, thanks for
it. All right. With that, I guess, thanks everybody for joining. Great seeing y'all. And Justin, when's our next GWAC?
Sure.
Meeting?
I'm gonna have to look it up real quick here. Let's see if I've got. Do I have it on the agenda? Nope. Sorry, just one moment. So our next. All right, here it is. Next meeting is going to be August 25th. That should be a Tuesday. And then looking even further ahead, last meeting of the year will be November 17th. So I'll get out. We're just now putting together the agenda for the August commission meeting. And once we do that, and I know what's groundwater related, I'll send out a draft agenda for GWAC with those items on it. We'll plan on getting together end of August.
Sounds good.
Right.
Well, thank you, Justin, and thanks everybody for participating. Great seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Good seeing everybody. Hope everybody's doing well.
All right. Have a good afternoon, folks.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.